In part 17 of our respectful rebuttal of Richard Gage's video, Blueprint for Truth, I want to ask you and I want to ask myself some kind of difficult and challenging questions. The number one objection people put out against controlled demolition could well be, how would people have been able to load all those bombs into the building and get away with it? I wanted to ask you about access for secret preparations for this controlled demolition. If your gut tells you it would be impossible to secretly prepare for a controlled demolition in a building where over 40,000 workers are coming and going day and night, working the New York, London, and Tokyo stock exchanges, I think you're right. NIST says 1/4 of all 1993 World Trade Center attack survivors, remember that first terrorist attack back then? They were still working at World Trade Center buildings in September of 2001, and they told stories. These were highly secure buildings with a massively worried New York workforce. Now, the tallest building ever demolished was the 30-plus story J.L. Hudson building in Detroit. CDI's 12-person loading crew took 24 days to place 4,118 separate charges in 1,100 locations on columns on 9 levels of the complex. Over 36,000 feet of detonating cord, 4,512 non-electric delay elements were installed for a building with only 7% of the volume of one of the Twin Towers. And the explosive sounds of this demolition were deafening, and there were dozens and dozens of them. The explosive charges used to bring down the sleeker and more modern Landmark Tower in Fort Worth weighed 364 pounds. To break the structural steel, 369 linear-shaped armor-piercing charges were required. Concrete columns were broken with larger chunks of RDX ranging from 2 ounces to 12 ounces. Each charge position had trump lines and multiple detonators to ensure reliability. The extremely loud detonation period had 120 different sequenced and delayed detonations of 8 milliseconds or greater, starting 6 seconds before the collapse began. I've already played an example of an explosive demolition, and the noise, the flashes of light, the organized pattern of squibs are unmistakable. There is nothing like those explosive sounds on videos of the collapses of any of the 3 World Trade Center buildings, and no known way to significantly muffle the sound of explosives by more than about 8 decibels. These 12-ounce explosives for a much smaller tower are quiet compared to the sounds that would be recreated by an explosive destruction of the Twin Towers. The World Trade Center would require 24 times more work per building than these buildings did, in secret, with tens of thousands of nervous office workers around. Former controlled demolition employee and advocate Tom Sullivan says shaped charges would be used for lateral ejection. That would have required welding torches, etc. And you'll hear now then the smell of burning metal, the noise of the setup. And here's what one of the dozens of columns looked like. At a minimum, every one of those columns would have needed several shaped charges up and down the length of the building to have pulled off the demolition, quote, overkill David Chandler claims occurred in Building 7 that day. The outer structural supports were right by the most desirable offices on the outside perimeter, which would be incredibly difficult to hide from the high-level government corporate workers who had occupied them. If nanothermites were just painted onto the beams, that would have warmed the steel perhaps, but a paint layer would not have concentrated enough heat to cut through. And what about receivers and detonators? Remote controls in the core would have had a hard time receiving the trigger signals amidst the aftermath of the plane crashes in the inside of an acre of structural steel per floor. Firefighters even reported having trouble with their communication devices that day. Remote controls would have to be installed everywhere. They'd be knocking out walls, poking holes everywhere, placing demolition materials in precise places, as Tom Sullivan said. Controlled demolition preparation requires complete control of the building to get it ready for destruction, to get it just right. Richard Gage believes explosive nanothermites may have been used to destroy the Twin Towers, but the thermate would have created a heat-based destruction of Building 7. Now, it's true there were no explosive squibs or lateral ejections from the north perimeter wall that we could see from the collapse of Building 7. But didn't we see the same extensive pulverization of concrete in all 3 of these buildings? Would a heat-based thermate create the same extensive pulverization as an explosive nanothermitic explosion? And now I'm going to depart from the science of these collapses and go where Richard Gage claims he does not go. He says he is not a conspiracy theorist and he resists speculation, but he clearly thinks this is a conspiracy. Well, I do too. I subscribe to the standard conspiracy theory that a well-financed group of terrorists who enjoyed the full protection of Afghanistan's Taliban government and was openly operating out of sophisticated training camps and not hiding in caves, I might add, was led by the CIA-trained and war-hardened Osama bin Laden. Richard Gage subscribes to what David Ray Griffin correctly calls the alternative conspiracy theory. Some people will object to me bringing this up at all because they work so hard to do the best possible research on controlled demolition and want to stick to the science. But not every 9/11 truth activist in this is the same. I want you to look and see how big you think this conspiracy is. Sometimes I hear it would take only a handful of people to set this demolition up. And other times I hear people speculating that a huge operation like this would have required the coordination of hundreds of people. I would agree with the latter, and therefore believe it is extremely unlikely. How many people and how many departments do you think it might have been required to pull this off? If you believe in the controlled demolition theory, I ask that you take out a sheet of paper right now and start counting all the people you suspect are part of this cover-up. Don't forget to include not only the people who brought the bombs in, but a vast support staff. Richard Gage says this is not a conspiracy theory, but in his own video or in our debate, he has cast aspersions on the mayor's office, the building owner, George Bush, his brother Marvin Bush, and the Secure Comm Company, Dick Cheney, even Rumsfeld, who supposedly knew a jet was about to plow into the building he was in that day, the NSA, the BBC, the governor and staff, Larry Silverstein, who owned the buildings, the phony man-on-the-street interviewees, the elevator repair people, the security guards, at least one major controlled demolition firm, dozens or maybe hundreds of skilled controlled demolition experts installing the devices over a period of several months, Fox News, the BBC, the CIA, the FBI, the quote government who lied to us about the building collapses, the 9/11 Commission members who reinforced the government lie, FEMA, who was there with biological warfare drills on 9/10, and NIST, who quote justified the lie, and quote the corporate media who repeated it, and they hammered it in. Near the end of Blueprint for Truth, Gage says it takes months to engineer and place these explosives. This is just the beginning of your journey back into the nightmare of 9/11. Richard Gage, that is a conspiracy theory, no matter how often you deny it. If you agree with Richard Gage that all these people were in on the conspiracy, write them down and keep count. Perhaps in your nightmare, the net of suspicion is also cast over the fire and police chiefs and their assistants, the guys who trained the bomb-sniffing dogs, Popular Mechanics, Structure Magazine, National Geographic Magazine, the History Channel, United and American Airlines people, Skeptic Magazine, the guy who runs WikiLeaks, NPR, Reuters News Agency, PBS, me personally, then add people I may have forgotten to mention. Many controlled demolition advocates believe that owner Larry Silverstein admitted to being in on the decision to, quote, pull Building 7, supposedly a term used by controlled demolition experts. It's also a term used by firefighters, to pull firefighters out of a collapse zone, and Silverstein was talking to first responders, not controlled demolition people. If Larry Silverstein admitted to demolition, would insurance companies have given him billions of dollars? They were looking for excuses not to pay him, and at first they threatened to deny his claims because Bush declared the 9/11 attacks as an act of war, and acts of war are not covered on his policy. If you think Mayor Giuliani was in on the plot, I would love to have been a fly on the wall when someone walked into his office and first told him about a secret government conspiracy to kill thousands of New Yorkers. Giuliani is a conservative, and whatever you think of him, it is the instinct of conservatives to protect their own. Firefighters protect their own, so do the police and soldiers. If you're a New Yorker just going about your business, job number one for the mayor would have been to protect you from harm. If you're an American just going about your business, soldiers, firefighters, and cops will literally lay down their lives to protect you. So as you add people like these to your list, ask yourself if you think they would just roll over and let some spooks from another government agency engineer a secret massacre of thousands of Americans on their watch. At least some of those tough souls could not be easily terrorized into silence due to a combination of military discipline and patriotism. And among the hundreds of cowardly civilians on that list, one person getting a diagnosis of terminal cancer and deciding to reveal the truth because they don't want to die and go to hell with this unatoned sin on their souls would blow the whole cover. Finally, are you considering the Obama administration, which many 9/11 truth activists have told me is now in on the cover-up? Think hard about that one. It's exhausting for me to even contemplate the reach of this alleged cover-up, if your imagination takes you this far, as it does for many people I've talked to. Now, I know some progressives are angry with Obama for not going far enough with some kind of liberal agenda, but do you believe that only a co-conspirator could even be allowed to run for president at all? I'm not making any of this up. Other people I've talked to have made this up. Where do you draw the line between those who are in on this and those who are not? How about the theory that Osama bin Laden is still alive, or worked closely with the Bush administration, or died years ago, in spite of the fact that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have both publicly acknowledged his death at the hands of U.S. forces in the spring of 2011? I'm not telling you how big the conspiracy would have to be. I'm asking you to answer this question yourself and come up with a concrete numerical estimate. There are as many answers to this as there are people in this movement. For some, it's tens of thousands. Now look at that number, whatever it is, and ask yourself, can 100% of these people be trusted to keep this horrific act of terrorism against the American people a secret? Take a breath. Look at that list again. Now do a reality check. Is it even possible to hide this in the era of WikiLeaks, blogs, and a worldwide media net? 9/11 controlled demolition theorists tell us that large percentages of people believe their theory, but the most recent Zogby poll that I was able to find from 2008 showed that 4.2% of Americans believe that the government made 9/11 happen. 26.5% said the government let it happen. Now that 26% is probably caused by the many articles about Bush ignoring his national security briefings. Very few people believe in the controlled demolition theory, even among groups of people with strong anti-government sentiments. Is this only because people are afraid of the truth, or could it be that controlled demolition theory flies in the face of common sense, especially when it comes to the first question everyone seems to ask: how could they have put the bombs in there in the first place? I believe the common sense answer and the correct answer are the same. They can't. There's also a common sense objection to the NIST theory of Building 7's collapse. And at last, it will be time for us to look at that 2.25 second free fall drop of the north perimeter wall to see how this is possible. One would think that free fall would mean no resistance, but that's not quite true. We'll talk about that in part 17